A couple of weeks ago, the Canadian Energy Regulator issued a report that said that Alberta and Saskatchewan would lead Canada in the addition of renewable generating capacity, basically wind and solar. So I'm going to talk to Dr. Sara Simons-Hasting of the University of Calgary, who's done a lot of work in this area, about that report. So welcome to the interview, Sara.
Morning, Markham.
Well, look, before we get started, just some quick numbers for viewers so they understand the context. So in Alberta, there is 16,515 megawatts of electricity generating capacity. It's as of 2019. Coal makes up 35%, gas makes up 46%, hydro is 5.5%, wind is 10%, solar is almost zero as of 2019. But the CER, the Canadian Energy Regulator, thinks that wind capacity in Alberta will double by 2023, and 1,200 megawatts of solar generating capacity will be added by the same year. That's a lot of capacity. So where's it coming from, and who's using it, I guess, is what we're going to ask. Sara, what's your take on that, on the report, and particularly on utility scale additions of wind and solar?
Yeah, I think that we are going to see significant growth in both wind and solar. And so, we know things are changing quickly, right? So those 2019 numbers you were talking about already, obviously, we're seeing the impact of coal coming offline. We're seeing a number of utility scale solar projects. I remember when the days when there was one and you knew the one solar project, and now I'm starting to lose track of all their names. So that's how I know that it's growing. There's just a really significant potential in Alberta, looking at projects in the queue, which are projects that have reached some stage of development. They may not all get built, but it means that there is the potential, say, to develop a wind or solar project. And I think last time I checked, it was somewhere around between 5 and 7 gigawatts, so 5 to 7,000 megawatts for wind, and a similar amount for solar. So I think if anything, we're gonna see the installations exceed expectations, really, as they have done up to this point.
Are we going to see wind and solar push coal right out of the market in Alberta by 2030?
Well, that's an interesting question of what happens with the coal and what it gets replaced with. So, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is that coal is already coming offline much faster than the 2030 deadline. I think the something like 2023 is now forecasted to be the date when the last coal plant comes offline. And that's really getting replaced by a mixture of, conversions of coal plants to gas plants, building out there is a new gas plant that's under construction, but also a significant amount of wind and solar. And I think, it's different if you ask what will happen and what should happen. If we want to say, what's sort of the best for the province of Alberta, as far as costs and as far as preparing for that, low carbon future, building out as much wind and solar as that coal is coming offline, I think will put the province on a good track.
Now let's talk about something that you've done work on over the last couple of years, and that's power purchase agreements with corporate customers. We've seen the Royal Bank, we've seen other corporate customers contract directly with wind and solar developers. What can you tell us about PPAs?
Yeah, so corporate PPAs and corporate and institutional PPAs is a really important driver of renewable energy development in the US. And we're starting to see that really taking off in Alberta as well. And so the basic idea behind it is that a corporation, so you mentioned, RBC the bank, there's a number of energy companies, Shell, that just recently entered into a deal. Somebody who uses electricity can enter into an agreement directly with a renewable energy developer to have a wind or solar facility built. And this is really a powerful way for development to happen, because you're basically able to use the credit rating, the balance sheet of this off-taker, of the corporate, who can then allow the developer to finance a project and get those wind and solar farms built, and doing so in a way that because the corporate is, using electricity within the province, it creates sort of a natural hedge against the energy market price. And this is something that works really well within the deregulated market that we have in Alberta. And I think we're just starting to see, the tip of the iceberg that's really growing. I mean, I think, I can't remember another time where we had a handful of announcements within the same week. And so this is something, as you mentioned, I've worked on for a while. Back in 2018, 2019, when I was at the Pembina Institute, we started up in collaboration with the Rocky Mountain Institute Business Renewable Centre Canada, which is a not-for-profit organization that helps to connect buyers and sellers of renewable energy. And it's exciting to see that this is starting to happen now in a major way.
Now, when a corporation like Shell or the Royal Bank enters into a PPA, does that electricity go into the grid, or is it being sold off grid to the corporate customer?
Yeah, great question. So it does go into the grid. And so these power purchase agreements, or sometimes they're called virtual power purchase agreements, is basically a sort of a contract that gets layered on top of the electricity that a company is buying. So, if you were a corporation and I was a developer and we entered into this agreement, basically we would be agreeing on a price for the power. So I would build a wind farm and you would promise me that for every megawatt hour that wind farm generates, you're going to guarantee that I'm going to get paid, let's call it $40. It's maybe around the right number, maybe a little low, a little high. And so what would happen then is that I would typically sell that power into the power pool, just like I would if I was just, if we didn't have a contract. And if the price that I receive for that power from the power pool is below $40, then you'll pay me to make up the difference. And if the price that I receive is above $40, then I actually give that difference to you. And so what that does is by giving me that contract for that firm price, I am able to go and build that power plant, or that wind farm or that solar farm, and you're able to get that price hedge, because if the price of power is lower, well, that means that you're paying less for your electricity overall, and so you can, that's sort of you come out a winner on that side for the rest of your electricity that you're buying. And if the price is higher, then you're actually getting that difference back as a payment. And so this is the same kind of construct that the government of Alberta used recently in their REP projects. People also call it this contract for difference, of this guaranteed price. And what we showed in this recent work that I did with Professor Blake Schaefer at the Policy School, we showed that so far those projects in Alberta, those wind projects, have actually been in the money, made money for the Alberta government. And so the same thing can happen within these corporate procurements. They can actually be money generating for the off-taker, for the purchaser of the electricity. It's not guaranteed because it depends on the price of power, but it can work out that way.
Well, let's talk about Alberta's electricity system, because as I understand it, Sarah, this kind of a market doesn't exist anywhere else. Ontario is the closest, but its generating capacity is layered on the market with long-term contracts, so it's not really the same. This is the only pure electricity market in Canada that would look more like some of those in the US, and that has got to bode well for the addition of wind and solar going forward in the 2020s, the ease with which developers can bring wind and solar projects onto the grid.
Yeah, that's right. With Alberta, you have a region that has a very good wind and solar resource. So, we have good places for development. You have all this coal that's coming offline, so you have the need to build power. But unlike our neighbors, to the east in Saskatchewan, we have, as you say, this deregulated market. And so what is different between Alberta and Saskatchewan in the market is that this deal that I just described, we, as long as I'm a certified power producer, we can just go and do that. And we don't need any sort of permission from the utility operator. In Saskatchewan, if you wanted to do the same thing, you would need to get, permission basically from Sask Power to transmit the power over their transmission lines, or to somehow be allowed to add power into the system in this way. And so that's why I think you're seeing that these deals are starting to happen in Alberta instead of in Saskatchewan. It'll be interesting to watch over the coming, years if the Saskatchewan government looks at what's happening in Alberta, because really what this is investment that's coming into the province to build out these wind and solar farms. And so for the energy consumers of Alberta, it's a great thing. It's also a really great thing for many of the communities where these projects are developed. So, as long as they are done well and done with care by developers, the impact on the land is relatively minimal. But what it does provide is very significant amounts of tax base, basically, for these rural municipalities, as well as the jobs during the construction period. But that tax base, of course, goes on for the lifetime of the project, and that can be a very important source of revenue for rural municipalities where those projects are developed.
Final question, Sarah. Alberta has a lot of industry, and most of it tied to oil and gas extraction, but it also has Canada's highest greenhouse gas emissions. So is there any option or opportunity going forward during the 2020s for the government and industry to look at this and go, well, hey, if we have all this cheap wind and solar that we can build in southern Alberta, we can bring it to the grid easily, we can attract the capital to do that, and maybe we can electrify some of this oil and gas in our industry to bring our emissions down. Is that a likely scenario, or at least a plausible scenario?
So I think it's certainly plausible, and it is, part of, Alberta's has a law on the books to reach 30% renewable energy generation by 2030. So that was, obviously put in place under the previous government, but it still stands today. And so in principle, that's the direction the province, is heading according to its own laws. There is, as you say, that resource is there, and there is this proven ability to attract capital. And we know that it is, it's going to get us on the right track to where we want to be, right? As we're trying to reduce emissions, we know that a big piece of that is to electrify, more and more uses of energy, and to make that electricity as clean as possible. I think one of the big questions is, as you start to go beyond that, 30 to 50% renewables, what are you going to do to really integrate even higher amounts of renewables on the grid? And so looking forward at the need for things like transmission lines to other provinces, or building out long duration storage, things like that will be a sort of questions for the later years. But I think in the near term, full speed ahead on building out as much of that resource as we can with the grid the way that it looks today, and then using that electricity where it makes sense to displace other higher power or higher carbon sources of energy is both makes a lot of sense, and is very much something that could happen.
Sarah, thank you very much for this. Lots of interesting insights. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.